Third video on the ecology series that we're working on here for middle school science on ecosystem relationships. And in this one, we're going to be focusing on limiting factors that affect population growth other than competition, which we talked about in the previous video. So once again, populations would tend to grow exponentially if it wasn't for the fact that there are limiting factors. So because there is competition and lack of resources, populations will actually grow what's called logistically. They will grow slowly at first while there's very few mates and it's hard to find each other. Then it will explode. But as they approach that maximal number that the ecosystem can support, which is called carrying capacity, which depends on biotic and abiotic factors, which we're about to discuss, you end up slowing down the rate. And if any population goes over the carrying capacity, it will just end up crashing back below it. And so that creates a tendency to flatten out near the carrying capacity. Now, in the last video, we talked about competition. In this one, we're going to be talking about, other factors. Now, why do organisms compete? They compete because there are limited nutrients and resources. Now, nutrients generally refers to something the organism needs, while resources refers to something the organism can use or helps the organism survive. But there are many examples of such limiting factors that can hurt. For example, the availability of sunlight could be crucial, especially for plants that are trying to outcompete other plants. The availability of water is another one that is usually the limiting factor. So these are the two main ones, right? The temperature and the water of the ecosystem is the key, right? So if you look at a desert and the fact that it has very low diversity, that's because it doesn't have any water, right? Even though it has a lot of temperature. If you look at places that have a lot of water but not a lot of sunlight, like the bottom of the ocean, you don't have a lot of productivity either, and you have limits to the amount of growth that you can have there. So those are the key things that our ecosystem needs. But then you have other things. You have the availability of nutrients or the availability of food. Is the soil rich? Are there enough mates around? Is there shelter for the organisms to live? So all of these are things that organisms need to find. And even micronutrients like heavy metals like copper and iron and other things which are used in life, or calcium, magnesium, sulfur, right? These are all important for plants to survive and for organisms to survive. And definitely nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium and carbon, which are the main nutrients used by plants. But either way, availability of nutrients is going to limit that. It's going to get to a point there's not going to be enough to go around, and that's going to cause populations to crash. The next limiting factor I want to talk about is this idea of predation. How is predation a limiting factor? Well, populations can grow forever if there's other things eating them and killing them, right? And so the more prey you have, the more predators can eat them. So that causes an increase in predator numbers. But if you have more predators, then they eat more prey, which causes a decrease in prey. And now there's not enough food for the predators, so the predators will end up crashing. If there's less predators, now the prey can grow more because it's being hunted less. And now you get more prey. And that causes an everlasting cycle of going up and down between the prey and the predators. Now, in real ecosystems, it's a little more complex than this because predators don't only eat one prey. But if they did, that's kind of how it would look like. But essentially, because of predation, populations cannot grow exponentially forever. In fact, the predators and the prey depend on each other on those numbers. Then you also have things like diseases or toxins. And there's a serious business for any ecosystem that's trying to make it through. When you have large herds, you have large amounts of manure and toxins that gather where they are. So that's why they have to keep moving, because not only because of the food, but because of the toxins. That's why humans living in cities have to deal with all the toxins that come from the cities, all the pollution. And parasites and diseases also spread, especially among situations where the organisms are living close to each other. And by the way, availability of nutrients is another thing that depends on the amount of people living close to each other. So they're called density dependent, because the more things living around, the worse the competition gets, right, for nutrients. And likewise, disease, toxins, and parasites will tend to spread faster and gather more where there's a lot of organisms. So that will also tend to slow down the growth rate because things end up dying because of these toxins, disease, and parasites. There are other limiting factors which do not depend on the density of the populations, just random killings that happen in the populations. A lot of disasters in this planet. It's a planet that's a lot of life, but also full of things that kill life, like wildfires, tornadoes, volcanoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, and drought, and global climate change. Whatever the reason may be, this indiscriminately kills thousands of living things every time it happens. In fact, in the history of this planet, the most killing forces have been disasters, right? There have been 5, arguably 6 great mass extinctions. The 6th one is happening right now, and all of them have been caused by disasters. The latest one is called humans. That's the worst disaster that has ever come to the history of this planet. It's killing faster than the fastest extinction that ever happened, the Permian mass extinction. The rate at which we are losing species right now is much higher than that. So if you ask me, what is the role, the ecological role of a human in the history of this planet, it's going to be causing the 6th great mass extinction. We are a natural disaster unless we make serious changes to the way we're living. Either way, disasters will often cause, whether it's a pandemic disease or any of these on the screen, will cause massive losses of life all across the food web. Now, of course, when these disasters kill plants, producers, algae, then it's really bad, right? Because that causes massive effects throughout the whole food web, which relies on the bottom of the pyramid, right? So that's what happened to the dinosaurs. Like a meteor strike is not what killed them, is the dust that blocked the sunlight and caused a lot of plants to die off that made it impossible to support large dinosaurs around. So, and they got outcompeted by other species that were more resilient. So they're not around. Same might happen to us. We are killing the entire ecosystem. We're at the top of the food chain. I wonder if we're going to make it. Probably not. Anyways, going to the next one. There's also things that depend on the population itself. These are also density dependent. Some populations grow faster than others, right? So a mice will have way more offspring than an elephant will. A bacteria will grow a lot faster than either. And if you look at things like insects or fish, they lay thousands of eggs all at once. And so the rate at which each population grows has to do with its own physiology, with its own genetics, and that also affects how fast populations can grow. But what's interesting is that some species, like mole rats, for example, as their numbers increase a lot, they themselves start to reproduce slower to try to avoid a situation where they got to compete too much. And so there are changes in the intrinsic growth rate that can actually happen. So these are all examples of limiting factors that alter and limit the population growth of species. And I hope that makes that clear. And on the next video, we're going to shift gears to community ecology relationships, which are relationships between species. I'll see you guys then.